business owners likely will have only one shot to sell a business. Most don't understand what drives value and how buyers look at a business. Until now. Welcome to the How to Sell a Business podcast, where every week we talk to the subject matter experts, advisors, and those around the deal table about how to sell at maximum value. Every business will go to sell one day. It's only a matter of when. We're glad you're here. The podcast starts now.
One of the most requested topics that we field from our listeners is to talk about trucking. And I went on a quest to find who's the authority in the trucking industry that could talk to me about, just what it takes to sell a trucking company. And the fact of the matter is, you just don't know how much trucking is a part of everyday life. This is a $12 trillion industry that we're dealing with, and it affects literally everything that we do has some level of trucking somewhere. So I had the opportunity. I found the Tenney Group, and Spencer Tenney is the president and CEO of that organization, and he is really the authority in trucking. He's second generation. His dad started the business, and he got into it as a deal maker, and truly he educated me on so much. So many things about the trucking industry that I just didn't understand. Their practice is predominantly, bigger than the folks that we normally see, but the same things that we talked about are applicable. So and I think what you'll see and hear in the podcast is that the planning and how you approach succession is I don't want to say the same, but there's nuances that will make a huge difference in the sale of a trucking company. And that's what's important when you find a deal maker. So, and I would also be remiss is that Spencer also has his own podcast called The Hot Seat, and he certainly picked up a new subscriber. And I hope you'll, especially those that have asked for this type of episode, I hope you enjoy it, because I learned a lot, and I think you will too, especially when it comes to the nuances of making a great deal. So enjoy my conversation with Spencer Tenney of the Tenney Group. Well, welcome to the show, Spencer.
Good to be with you, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Well, before you came on, I kind of gave a quick overview of you and from your bio and about the Tenney Group, but I probably didn't do it justice. So if you don't mind, just take a couple minutes and talk about your M&A shop and what you're doing.
I'm a third generation transportation guy. My dad drove a beer truck, drove a taxi in the Dallas back in the 50s and the 60s, and my dad swore he'd never get in transportation. I swore I'd never get in transportation, and here we are, 50 years later, advising on deals. And so really it got started. My dad started advising on business sales and acquisitions back in 1973. And I joined up with him about 20 years ago. And I'd always watched him, come alongside folks that literally make America move. They're the folks that are moving freight, moving passengers. And I was always kind of fascinated by the folks building these businesses and what the role that my dad played in helping them kind of come at that last moment and help them, realize the American dream and exit and, begin a whole new chapter in life. And so I went out and tried to do some other things, failed horribly in the music industry and did some other things. But ultimately just couldn't shake that high of helping business owners go to the next level and exit. And so I teamed up with him. We worked together about 20 years. And then here we are today. I bought him out about 5 years ago, and that's what we do. We focus exclusively on primarily sell-side advisory, transportation logistics companies all across the United States. And the pocket that we focus on is kind of in that lower middle market of 20 to 300 million in annual revenue. And, right now we have about 19 sell-side engagements that fit that profile. And it's just it's a privilege doing what we do.
Well, it is, and you got one of the best shops in the land. I mean, when I invite people, we do some pretty good vetting on who's kind of the subject matter expert, and your name kept coming up. So I'm real excited to visit about just what makes your practice special, and I guess and that kind of leads me to my first question, is that trucking, there's different silos of trucking. Can you talk a little bit? Let's start there. What is trucking? I know we got long haul and short haul, but there's more subsegments.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a whole universe in itself. I mean, you say just, trucking logistics but when you think about the global market, you're talking about like a $12 trillion global transportation logistics market. It's enormous. And so you start breaking that into the verticals. I'll just name off just with what we represent right now. I mean, we have the liquid bulk. We've got dry bulk. We've got refrigerated trucking. You've got your traditional dry van. You've got your flatbed. You've got drayage on the ports. You've got intermodal. And so there's a host and of course 3PL and your brokerage that are the asset light component of that. And then you have warehousing. So all these things that make the supply chain, the greatest invention of humankind. I mean, all those things working together, that's what we work.
So when we have an industry as broad as trucking, different areas tend to command higher values. Not to imply that they don't have value, but it seems as though what seems to be the hottest area to be in right now?
I think the main thing is where we can get a sense for that is where is the highest demand for what types of companies are being acquired. And I think when you have a market like this where the freight's pretty soft right now, you look at in terms of economically what's happening the last 2 years. I mean, it was the wild, wild west. I mean, people were getting pretty much whatever they asked for to move freight, and that's changed over the last 6 to 9 months. And so, in this environment, what buyers are looking for are what types of companies have insulation from shifts within the economy and all different types of things. Who has profits that are insulated from that? So that's where you see these specialized carriers. We did a deal with Keenan Advantage Group. They're one of the most prolific acquirers in North America and have been for 20 years. And, because of all the things going on, they really wanted to get into the brokerage space. They didn't have any expertise in that, but they went out and hired who was the best expert on the brokerage side in terms of transloading and dealing in the petro world as well. And, so that was just their whole deal. It's we want to acquire things that we know that we're not good at. We don't have an expertise. Who's already established that niche expertise? And so I think those are the folks that, alternatively, when you look at your traditional dry van kind of commodity based type deals, it's very harder for those companies to hold value in good and, more challenging markets. So the folks that really have smaller insulated niche markets, those are the people that are really sought after right now.
I get it. So you had talked about the last 18, 24 months, everything was going great. And one of the things that in my research for this is that, as an industry as a whole, it's only forecasted to grow only a point and a third, which to me is astounding given that, so much manufacturing is coming back to the United States, coupled with that the retail spending is expected to be higher, which clearly prompts a higher demand for freight volume. So I'm kind of curious to know how that, what do you think of that? I mean, it seems to be conflicting.
Well, I think if you look at it in whole, it's more challenging to make sense of that. But when you kind of break it out into pieces, like what you're describing, kind of that final mile e-commerce component, I mean, you're talking about 20 to 30% year over year growth projected over the next 3 to 5 years. That's very different than, some of your more commodity based, some of the things that have direct exposure. when you have major dips in the housing market, which affects construction, when you see Amazon and Walmart lay off thousands of employees, that affects consumer confidence, and that affects freight. And so I think so. Like when you blend all that together, that's why you kind of only see that 1%.
I see. So it's I don't want to say misleading, but that number is totally misleading when you start looking into the various silos of freight. It is substantially different. I
just think it's incomplete. So, maybe not misleading. It's just an incomplete assessment of like what's actually happened.
Yeah. That's a much better adjective. So what are the issues facing trucking today? I know the people that everybody that comes on, it's an employee issue. So I'm assuming that trucking's isn't any different. But I mean, what are these trends and challenges that we're facing?
ATRI, the American Transportation Research Institute, led by Rebecca Brewster, does a tremendous report each year in trucking in terms of the top 10 issues facing trucking. And really, for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, the top 2 have been driver retention and driver recruiting. But this last year, 2022, it was the first year that those have been surpassed in a couple of years. The number 1 was driver parking. There's only about 1 parking spot for about every 11 trucks on the road right now. It's a major crisis. And you think about all of this stress when these truckers are trying to, they've been on the road for 10 hours. They got to find a place to eat, shower, whatever else, and sleep, and they can't find anywhere to go. That just adds and compounds the challenge of trying to retain and recruit drivers because of how stressful this job is. And so, we joke about like, you need to thank a trucker for what they do. Like, this is a major problem because this is really affecting the morale, and the, just the overall experience of being a trucker. So we got to get this thing fixed. But those top 3 issues are pretty major. And then right now, just in terms of being a soft freight market, it's very difficult for people to earn the money when the rates on the overall trips are, 15, 20% down what they were 18 months ago. And so all those things combined, and I guess lastly would just be the overall, the increase in overall operating expense. So it's just very difficult. You're trying to grow. And that's kind of where we come in, because while we're seeing so much demand, even despite where we are with interest rates and economies, because the operating expenses are exploding. And the only way to offset that in many cases is through some type of acquisition to offset those rising costs. Yeah. So those are some major issues. And then lastly, I would probably add nuclear verdicts. I just saw an article in Transport Topics that again confirmed trucking is the highest industry of all industries targeted for nuclear verdicts. These are 9-figure type legal lawsuits around injury or personal injury or something else. And when you start having those types of claims, it just explodes the cost of insurance and really makes the industry a lot less fun.
Yeah, I want to circle back to what you were saying as far as there's only 1 space for every 11 drivers. Why is that? I mean, it seems as a crisis, I can totally understand what you're saying, but it would seem as though as many truck stops and truck related, areas that at least we see, going up and down 65, it would seem that that's not a problem. So I guess that one shocked me. Everything else you said totally made sense, but I was surprised that we didn't have sufficient spacing for them.
No, and I think that, largely it's not something widely known by the public, but it has a tremendous effect on the industry. And we've got to I think that we're way behind on getting a solution around this. And it's one of those things that just kind of compounded very quickly. I think part of that is because when they put the ELD mandates in place where, they have computer logs that tell you when the drivers have to get off the road, they can't fake it. So now they can't stretch the limits and keep driving. They have to stop. And so I think that makes, forces a lot of the truckers trying to get to the same spots all at the same time.
I get it. Well, like I said, it just, years ago, there was such a big push for people to buy, and, the truck stops were being consolidated. Like I said, it just caught me by surprise that not in a million years would I have thought that would have been the one of the biggest challenges facing the industry is especially with as much demand as there was to buy these truck stops. So interesting. The sale process on a trucking company. I mean, how much different is it for your pre-sale work and then, and then executing the sale versus any other type of business? I mean, you've got financial statements, you got due diligence, you have all the criteria that, that you have to do in order to facilitate a sale. I'm just kind of curious to know what differs in trucking.
Yeah, I think that there's the key things are, I mean, the CapEx element's a huge portion, and trying to understand, fleet age, what type of, maybe deferred CapEx could affect, like maybe that they've gone up to a sale and maybe they have not made the continued investments into their fleet. And so I think savvy buyers understand what to expect. And so from a preparation standpoint, what our job is to do, and I was like, hey, we expect to go take this to educated buyers who understand this industry, and we understand how they're going to scrutinize this. So part of our preparation is to get way out in front of all of that and to have an answer for all the things in terms of how have they handled their fleet and their maintenance, how is it going to affect EBITDA moving forward and forecasting from a performance standpoint. But we also want to have a compelling growth story. I think there's a lot of different things that, in this industry is like, hey, I could double my business in, overnight if I had the drivers or if I had the equipment. Well, we need to make a defensible case if that is in fact true and integrate that in terms of, some of the investment highlights of the deal. But the main thing is we just want the overall performance to be defensible. And we also want to make sure that we fully understand what are the strengths and weaknesses of the business. And then based on what our understanding of the broader buyer universe specific to transportation logistics, where are the best synergistic marriages with those types of buyers? And then how do we customize our presentation specifically to those buyers in a way where they understand, hey, this is a 1 + 1 = 3 type scenario for this type of transaction. So I think that I don't want to try to make it something bigger than it's not, but those are a couple of the different nuances that we're very intentional about on the front end. We have to do CapEx. We have to check out safety. We have to look at the driver rosters to understand if there's going to be any safety concerns about transferability of drivers, because if you got 300 drivers and 100 of them aren't going to meet standard, safety measures, well, we're not going to get that deal done. We need to know that on the front end.
Yeah, but one of a friend of mine up near Chicago. I mean, she has a trucking company, but it's predominantly aggregate. They're dump trucks and different things like that. I mean,
right.
And they're unionized, and they are fighting all the time with just not only retention, but and it sounds horrible, but the quality of the driver. I mean, that there's no way around it. And I feel for her because, she's getting to that age where, she's probably going to start thinking about, what does my last third of my life look like? And
right.
My goodness, they're fighting, it's a business full of landmines, and unfortunately, I'm not certain that she's going to be able to get. I don't want to say not get out from under it. I don't think she's going to be able to command the premium value given, how many.
I will say this, that there are certainly challenges. I think union, that's a whole different animal. I don't even know if that's fair to compare that apples to apples. There's a reason why people don't want to buy, union driver or union driver bases when they're looking at trucking companies, or any type of company for that matter. But I do think that there's some phenomenal companies that have developed these cultures that really understand the mindset of the driver, how to communicate with them, how to honor them in terms of the work that they're doing. And when you accomplish that, these drivers will, they'll walk over coals for you. They will do the job, do it well. And it's an inspiring thing. But it all starts with culture. And I think that if the leadership hasn't laid that out, if they're not leading with how do we get the best drivers and treat them the best that we can possibly, pay them as best as possibly we can, given within reason, and treat them with the respect. If they're not leading with that, then that's on the leadership. I think that's kind of where I see it.
No, that's a great point. And again, regardless of whether it's union or non-union type shops, you're right. You're right. It's likely a failure of leadership, and the challenge is just that. We've all seen businesses where, you can tell it's just a great place to work. And you're right. It's funny you say that, because it doesn't matter what type of business. Culture really, really does make a difference, especially when you're going to go through a process like this, that will, I don't know if it adds value or if it adds the more marketability. Maybe both, a little bit of both. All right. You touched on, I was going to ask this later on in our conversation, but one of the questions was EBITDA. You were talking about CapEx, and it is always, a monster battle. And I know you face it too. When I'm doing business valuation work, anything asset intensive, especially in a trucking environment, you just can't add all that depreciation. So I guess, when you look at it, how are you looking at depreciation? Because everybody's looking at that EBITDA multiple as their value.
I think what we try to do on the front of a process is we're trying to anticipate what is an educated buyer, how are they going to look at this ongoing CapEx expense, and how is that going to influence the way that they approach valuation. And so, we're modeling that out on the front end, and we're trying to anticipate, okay, what historically has been the CapEx commitment, maybe over the previous 5 years, and based on the growth track, what's for new equipment and what's for replacement CapEx. But it's two very different things: growth CapEx versus replacement CapEx. And so we're trying to look at that and making sure that we're keeping it consistent with what they've done. I think that helps make a defensible case when we're marketing the business.
That's a good point.
Well, yeah. And when we do that, when the buyer can see this is what's consistent, they may handle it differently. They may do everything different in terms of how they manage their fleet. But as long as we have a defensible case, we can, what we can do is we can remove the obstacles that would prevent someone from engaging and making an offer. And what I try to tell people is, when we're talking with our clients, is that whether it is, a part of a very thoughtful process, or if it's just kind of, engineered into the mindset of a buyer, they're just hey, given what I think it's going to be, this is where we're going to, it's kind of baked into it. But what we want to make sure is that our clients understand that whether they communicate it well or not, it's all a part of the way that the buyer thinks about the deal. And of course, and then we also demonstrate it from hey, as they're making these offers, we're showing them what is in a traditional deal structure, what is their net after debt service, after CapEx is added post-transaction. We kind of walk them through years 1 through 5. So they're oh, wow, there's not a whole lot of cushion there. Yep. I understand kind of where they're coming from. So I'm going to push hard, but clearly I can't push past this point because I wouldn't do that deal. Right. There's no no. There's no way. Right, so right. I think it just comes with educating and modeling, using the tools that we have and developed to anticipate how buyers are going to think about it, and using the relationships we know in terms of how they manage their fleets. And so when we get to the point we're having that discussion, we've got both the buyer and the seller in a place where we're talking apples to apples. And then, we're in a good environment to try to get a meeting of the minds.
Well, and you're right. And the funny thing is it's hard to argue CapEx. I mean, it just is, it's a real, I mean, you have to have it. And it's funny that, so often sellers are, they stop the CapEx, and you probably see it regularly, they kind of take their foot off the gas, no pun intended. And they start, stop doing the things that they historically have done in anticipation that the buyer isn't going to, it's just kind of going to gloss over it. And then they don't understand when they get that value penalty for the cost to cure the insufficiencies of the fleet. So I'm with you there. I just thought there was like a magic number. Yeah. Like, what, we take 30% of, the EBITDA or the depreciation, and that's roughly about where it should be. But I didn't think it was going to be that easy.
No. And honestly, like some people would say like, hey, we just replaced a huge portion of our fleet. So really there's going to be no material CapEx for years 1 and 2. But this is when it will start. And so then we'll start modeling that out the same way. Like we just won't have anything hitting, that P&L until maybe year 3 of that post-transaction model. Either way, like I think that when we're trying to do pre-sale education, the main thing that we're trying to instill into all business owners in this space is like, this is not something that you can kind of work the system. Like you're not going to kind of sneak this one under the, like, in like that, like a buyer's not going to notice it. Like, so like, and if you're dealing with someone that doesn't understand it, you probably don't want to do a deal with that person. So, that's
a great point.
And so, what's best is like, hey, take care of your business, keep doing the things that you need to do. You're not going to outsmart the system. An educated buyer is going to know that there's deferred CapEx and it will be accounted for in the way that they value the business.
I got it. I wanted to ask you about owner operators versus, just general employees. I mean, how is that playing into everything? I mean, is it good or bad?
I think what happens is like, most fleets, once you get to a certain level, they appreciate having some type of hybrid model of having both employee drivers and independent contractors. And what was interesting during the recession, I mean, the rates, I mean, the amount of money that could be made in freight was just enormous. So you had just thousands of drivers, employee drivers, peel off and become independent contractors because they wanted a larger piece of this bigger pie. And then immediately when the freight market softened, a huge surge of those folks coming back because they want that employee model. They want the protection of the employee model and the benefits and everything else that comes with that. So what I see is that business owners that are serious about building and protecting business value, it just makes sense to have a little bit of a hybrid model that allows you to flex and to be a little bit more agile given what's happening in the market. And so
that's a good point.
So most fleets at this point, I mean, I would say even like 5 to 10 years ago, some people had hard positions about, we are only independent contractors or we are only employee model drivers, but that's just not realistic anymore. I mean, you got to move freight and you got to do whatever you can. So like to have every tool in your tool belt is pretty key right now to make sure that you're, staying ahead of the pack.
Well, I know some of the people that are going to be listening to this are sub 30 million. I know that's kind of the floor for you guys. I mean, what do they do? I mean, is it more of a situation that, look for succession, or is there look for synergy? What are the smaller businesses to do?
Yeah, I think this happens quite a bit. I think what the deal is, it's not that we can't. We're just like trucking companies. We know, like the trucking company knows that they can only haul something across the country if they can meet costs and make profits. And so for us, it's the same thing. The conversations that I'll have with folks is that we'll do everything that we can to help point them in the right direction. But what we don't want to do is inject ourselves into a process where it becomes cost prohibitive based off, some of these for smaller companies, by the time you pay off all the equipment debt from the deal, maybe there's not a ton left for these owners. And so what we don't want to do is to, compound that challenge by putting ourselves and our fixed expenses into that process. But usually what I do, we have tremendous resources of education. We want to make sure that we connect them with that. We'll provide some guidance for folks to try to get a deal done directly with a buyer, or we will refer them to folks within that local market that might have different types of networks and contacts that might be a better fit for a smaller operator that, may appeal to folks that maybe want to have a trucking company that wouldn't necessarily be on a national network radar like us, but maybe that might be a better fit. But that's usually what we do, and that's what I would encourage. Use our education, and then we're happy to make recommendations if we know competent business brokers within that local market that could provide a different type of value and experience to get where they want to go.
I get it. One quick question. I'm getting ready to bump up on 4:10 my time. That's your hard stop, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'm going to mark this clip that I just interrupted. All right. So since we're coming to the end, I guess one of the things, two questions. One, I wanted to ask you, or I was asked to ask you, will we see, the Teslas of the semis out on the road, and how far away is it? And is it going to make any difference? So that's my first question. Any thoughts on that?
I think there's still a bit. I mean, there's the technology is accelerating fast. It's inevitable. It is coming. Some of that's already there. I mean, they're out there, but in terms of like actually having, that is part of normalcy in terms of what happens in freight. We're still a ways from that, but I think that the developments are very exciting for what this means for the industry. And I'm excited too. I mean, I have questions just like you in terms of what that's going to mean, but, but what's interesting about as kind of where I see where we're at right now, we have a lot of different enhancements and some developments. But with each of those new developments creates more questions in terms of support, infrastructure. How do we do these things? And so that there's an idea and there's a desire to, I think a broad desire to see electrification ASAP in this space. But in terms of the reality is infrastructure wise, we got a long ways to go before we're going to be seeing that widespread.
Amen to that. Well, I asked this about every guest I've had on for the last 80 episodes. So what is the one piece of advice you would give to, these business owners that would have the most impact on their business?
I think that I get really inspired from our clients, when they set out on this new adventure, once they exit and they start doing new things. And so I think a lot of folks stay in the business too long because they don't have a vision for that next chapter. And so what my advice is that you need to lock arms with people that have gone through the process before and learn from what they're doing. I've had clients that they've used the money from their proceeds. They basically created their own family office and now they're like their own private equity group. I mean, they're investing in deals and some have just done phenomenal things from a charitable giving standpoint, funding ministries in Africa and Haiti and doing all kinds of things that they never dreamed that they would be able to do. And so I think it's inspiring that type of bold action, I think, is what allows somebody that's 2 years away from a sale to get focused and saying I need to get my stuff together so I can go experience what they're doing. Because too many times, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Ed, it's just they're like, I'm done, I've had it. But they didn't do any of the work to go maximize their sale, and they leave money on the table. So that's my recommendation: is go lock arms with some people that you really see doing great things, following their exit, and learn from them, and start developing that vision. And I think that number one, you'll be much more prepared, and you'll have a better exit, and you'll just be able to start this new chapter of life much sooner and on much firmer footing as well.
That's fabulous advice. So, Spencer, where can people find you?
Best place, just our website, thetennygroup.com. But I would also follow us on LinkedIn or my personal or the Tenney Group's profile. We have tons of white papers, our podcast, In the Hot Seat, which we, just kind of talk about transportation and M&A and all the things. Just really fascinating guests. But those are really great places to kind of stay in tune with the work that we're doing.
Got it. Well, I'll have all of that in the show notes, and you seriously undersold your website, because it truly does have so much content, so much educational opportunities. I mean, most of my questions some of my questions came right off your website. So again, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to visit with you. And I know you don't have a lot of time, but I'm certainly grateful for how much you spent with us today. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Ed. And let's figure out how to do some deals together down the road.
Thank you for joining us today on the How to Sell Your Business podcast. If you want more episodes packed with strategies to help sell your business for the maximum value, visit howtosellabusinesspodcast.com for tips and best practices to make your exit life-changing. Better yet, subscribe now so you never miss future episodes. This program is copyrighted by MISO Inc. All rights reserved.